Hi there, and thank you for clicking on this video. We're going to be discussing the new bro carry level cap, where the newer player is actually doing the killing. Where normally the play style that's sort of developed in Warframe is the newer player just sort of has to survive when you're doing longer runs with more experienced players. Kind of wanted to go about it in a different direction, have a nice twist on it. Um, so the philosophy was, and I want to give a big thanks to Gray for being our newer player. Um, the point of this was to solve several problems at once, and it was honestly, I think me, Nova, and Sajin had, frankly, way more fun than he did. Um, but this is sort of a run that only more experienced players can do because you're having to use 3 frames to get enough damage onto the newer player so he can actually kill level cap. Um, Ideally, we found somebody who was very, very good, uh, like as a candidate, right? They hadn't formed anything. They didn't have any arcanes. They hadn't even completed this regular star chart, so they didn't have any weapon arcanes, no Zeraman arcanes, the whole shebang. But they had completed the new war, so they had done the Nadaruk. And if you're thinking of maybe doing this sort of run yourself, and you're a more experienced player, and you're sort of in the doldrums, like we all know how it is. If you're still playing Warframe and you're like LR1, LR2, LR3, there's stuff you enjoy doing, but there's nothing you really need to be doing, right? Like you might be like an Eidolon runner or like a PT addict, but you don't have to do that stuff. Like in order to make progress, it's like as primes get rotated, you'll pick up the stuff that you need to get more MR, and that's just kind of about it, right? So the idea for this was to do something new. It's a little bit of a fresh take. I'm really hesitant to say that like, oh, this is the first time this was done, but the fact is I tried to look up information on this, and there isn't anything on the forums of this sort of run being done like this. There's nothing on Reddit. I haven't seen any videos where it's this style where it's dual level cap disruption, and the point is to get the new player, so you'll have 3 experienced players and the new person for 4, and the 3 experienced players are using all of their resources and all of their mods and all of their arcanes, their frame synergies and everything, to make it okay for the new player to be in that space where before they might have to cheese it with like invincibility, so say like the taking Brevenant or like an Avara or a Loki or something like that, and maybe buying a Riven or something. Like they would kind of have to swipe if they had only completed like 2/3 of the star chart, and like they didn't even have Forma in their weapons. You know what I mean? Like you can do incredible things, even with like the basic starting weapons, but you gotta throw Forma at it, and you have to have arcanes and whatnot to be able to do it. So it's an older player or a player with resources applying those resources to the lower MR weapon. But if you wanted to take a newer player, if they were like, oh, like a new player is like, oh, I've always wanted to do a level cap, instead of giving them like a 10 Forma build and like, oh, you need this arcane, you can just be like, oh, new bro, listen, we got you completely. What would your setup be for the higher MR player, right? So that was the challenge. The rules were simple. The 3 more experienced players have we basically all have everything. So in terms of like modding flexibility, it was infinite. The only real rule that we gave ourselves is no revenant and no stealth. So no invisibility. So like Avaro stealth arrow, like the cloak arrow. And no revenant charges. Like no I win buttons. You know what I mean? So we ended up taking Citrine, which is why I'm on this frame, Harrow, and Chroma. We ended up, when we were trying to theory craft this, and I will be going over builds further into the video, but I'm going to talk about the run itself because this might be like a new way of thinking about something. And I've talked to a couple other higher playtime, people, and they were all kind of excited about it because none of them had heard of anything. So maybe this is like something new, but I can't say that. Somebody's probably done this before. So how do you get somebody who is new to the game and has all of this energy and is like, oh, I see those people doing those crazy level caps. You need like insane builds. Like if you wanted to be like, nah, dude, you don't need any of that shit. Team synergies can take care of the entire thing. What would the 3 higher MR players take, right? So no cheating, no I win buttons. We did have to, in terms of like it being our first time doing this, Xenuric Protective Dash was used by me. I think one of the other guys took it, but I know I was the primary person using it. The other person I think was layered on top. And we did use a Harrow for Harrow's 4 with a little bit of duration with it. I don't think it was a ton, like an absurd amount, but for a couple iframes just to make the later rounds in Disruption a little bit easier because we knew it was going to get chaotic. We knew it was going to be a panic at higher levels. But we wanted to stay away from I win buttons, right? Like the Revenant. So here's how we broke down the things we had to focus on. And the synergy, it's not anything insane, but it definitely felt like old Warframe a bit. Right? Like this is something where you need 3 people that know what they're doing to be able to get the synergies necessary. Like we even had to coordinate auras. So it's none of this shit where it's like you see like a build for like a frame and it's like, oh, take brief or spite. It's like, no, the team needs 1 brief or spite. We need other multipliers, so nobody's taking the same aura. I think we did end up going double corrosive projection, but it was a choice. It wasn't a standard build, right? So this was very, very flexible building. And I ended up having to dump a bunch of format. Like there's a reason I got the Accolado. I ended up using the Scourge Prime for headshots because we had Harrow. And Chroma was our base damage, right? But to tell you how I broke this down, 1 second. Apologies, I had to sneeze. We basically broke down the priority list of things that the 3 of us had to cover as we needed a bit of base damage, we needed crit, and one of the things that worked in our favor is the crit damage mod for all of your weapons, except pistols, you get incredibly early. Like, there's no primed version of Vital Sense, right? Like, if you have Vital Sense on your primary, like, what's the other crit damage mod? Like, Hammer Shot? Like, that's not a replacement. It's the default is Vital Sense for every build ever. And on very, very niche builds, not like hyper niche, but if you, because like Rivens can make Hammer Shot be more effective. But on like more niche builds, you might equip Hammer Shot also. You know what I'm saying? Right? So the fact is, we had to get base damage onto the new bro. We had to get crit chance onto the new bro. We didn't have to worry about crit damage. and then we had to get survivability onto him also. Uh, so we ended up using Chroma for the base damage and for flat armor. Citrine for the 90% damage reduction aura. So the armor stack from so the damage reduction from Citrine and the armor from Chroma was a super nice combination, because just between Chroma and Citrine you have a massive amount of base damage and armor, and Citrine gives crit chance, free elements, and damage reduction. So that got us, surprisingly, just those two, all the way into the 3000s, almost face tanking. And there was almost an exact point where the tank failed, and it was around 3200. It was like 3000 to 3500. By 3500, the tank had failed, obviously. Like, the exponential scaling kicked in, but what was getting us before is there's the Eximus. We did it on Olympus, right? Regular star chart, because the guy didn't have Steel Path, right? Like, the idea was to use a Nubro, not somebody on Steel Path. Because as an older player, if you're trying to make it as easy as possible, you would go to Olympus because there's no Nox, right? You don't have to worry about gas clouds. But the thing that ended up killing us way sooner and was such a pain in the ass is you have the Eximus that shoot out the little sparks. They kill you in one shot. And they track you when you're in Operator. So if you're in Operator stealthed trying to resurrect somebody, at higher levels, those sparks still do damage to you. And they kill you, they knock you down also. So that became the biggest issue first. But up until then, level 1000... the other thing that made this run way easier than it probably would have been otherwise is the player, Gray, had started Warframe right before 2022 TennoCon, so he got the free Stynax drop. Okay, and he had just completed the new war, so he had the Nataruk, and Stynax. So that made this, as hard as this run was and as fun as this run was, let's be honest here, him having those made this significantly easier than it could have potentially been. As if it compared to somebody who was, say, like MR0, right? Because you probably won't be able to do this with, like, somebody who's truly MR0 and is, like, actively getting their MR, because they'll have completed Vor's Prize. And the first disruption you can really do is on Mars, right? Which means you've gone from Earth to Venus to Mercury, and then you come back around and go to Mars, right? So you're not going to be able to do this with like an MR0. But the philosophy was get damage onto him, get crit chance onto him. He had Vital Sense, so that was a big help. Get elements and armor shred. So we were taking care of that. He was able to use Theros Strike, which was a massive help, right? Though we could have compensated for the armor strip for him. But because he had Theros Strike, that helped out a ton. And one of the ways that we were trying to figure out scaling, and it ended up not mattering, is we were trying to do... I was specifically there to get elements onto everything, so Citrine's a big help with that. But more importantly, Citrine supplies status chance. Right? Because the crystal, you run a shit ton of status chance. You can give people 300% status chance. And if they hit your crystal, you give them 300% crit chance. Right? So, like, if you were thinking about, like, it was like trying to replace stats on the other person's weapon, right? So, like, Chroma would be the base damage, and when you would look at the build, like, crit chance would be Citrine and Harrow, and Citrine would be status chance, and then you would quickly tack on the heat, electron, toxin, and cold, right? but you still get the status chance up front. So any weapon that they got is juiced to the tits. But we did add in the Scourge to help him out. The Altfire, for those that don't know, forces headshots. It's got a bullet attractor on it. So this combination with Harrow on something with 200% flat crit chance and 300% status chance is pretty fucking potent. Though I did not use a helmet on Citrain, I probably didn't need one. We did have Nourish, I think, on Chroma for additional viral damage as well. So the fact is like this became like an issue of like, how do we get stats onto his weapons? And this amount of synergy, it felt so good. It felt like old Warframe when doing like a long run. Like I was talking with Player 9 in the clan. I forget what his YouTube name is, but he was talking about how like his old meta when he was running Tower Keys was everybody, you would go as long as you could until the last person with the last revive would be in, and you would try to stay as long as possible, and then the last person would have like this panic run to the extraction point. And my experience kind of mirrored that. Like, I was very familiar with the extraction camp, right? But it was just, it felt like you had to know your synergies, you had to know a team comp. But the flexibility on this is very plug and play. I think we figured out a very stable, like easy to do setup for us, where it's Chroma, Harrow, Citrine. Because when it comes time to killing the Demolist, especially at higher levels, we were worried about his damage level. And we got him to the point. Hold on. I'm gonna show the final screenshot. This is you can't see it. But this is the level cap Demolist, and he's dealing 250,000 and just over 1 million damage on a red crit. And if you can't see the buffs because the granulation and all the effects, right? Hopefully you will be able to once my VOD just went live, but it's still standard definition. Once the HD version kicks in, I did a very, very high quality CQP scan or VOD, like a recording. And it's like at 14 or something like that. So YouTube's having an issue with it because it's like 153 gigs. So it's going to be a minute, but once that goes live, you'll be able to see everything way more clear. But we got him when he was dealing like 100 damage at like 3 to 4K at enemies. Obviously not Steel Path, but dealing dealing damage to him. He was dealing like 100 damage, right? Because he just didn't have the multipliers. Well, we got him at level cap all the way up to just over 1 million. So the theory craft of the crit chance, the statuses, the armor shred, the viral procs, the corrosive procs, the heat, toxin, electric, cold, the entire thing. When we figured out like how to get damage onto him, that ended up being money. Like we did that right. Okay. So like the 1 million damage hit on that, the 250,000 was probably like a body hit, and the 1 million was probably a headshot. Okay. But still, 1 million damage at level cap with essentially, not saying it, he had mods in it, but like essentially a weapon with no real multipliers on it. It proves you can get a shit ton of damage onto stuff as an aura, as like a team-based aura, right? So the idea, it was super fun for us. The only issue is that we had also instituted another rule of only he could kill the Demolist. So what we were thinking was he wouldn't kill all the Demolists, like he would kill one, and then we would dump the other three, right? Like that was, and we so the rules were simple. Okay, I've not been talking about, but let's say the actual rules: no invisibility, no Revenant cheese. We didn't want any I win buttons, and he was the only one that could kill Demolists. But we could trash clear. We could prime. We could strip the Demolists, but we couldn't kill them. He had to be the one to kill them. So the problem with this ended up being is when you get into the later rounds, even though it's not Steel Path, you kind of have to kill the Demolists, especially for a newer player. You're not really trying to mess around with enemy toxin weapons and energy drain on an Eximus, like get the 3 stack, right? So when those would come up, which, happen, and it's more of an issue at later levels, we were still trying to have him kill the Demolists just to sort of follow the rule and do it to what we said the first time, the self-limitation, the self-rules. I think the next time we do this, it's going to be the new player. We all put in one key. The new player kills that Demolist. We all follow him around, and we find the Demolist. We lock it down. We buff him up, and he kills that Demolist. And then we just blow through the other 3, right? I think that's going to speed it up, or maybe do like it's a free for all until he goes down the first time, he or she, right? So until the person starts having trouble surviving, it's a free for all because the enemies are obviously too easy, right? But at higher levels, you make sure the new player gets the experience of killing Demolists, and it's on you to run stuff to make sure he's included. Because if the idea in the disruption community for the long time was find the worst weapon with the worst build that can still do level cap. Well, people have already gone down to like Mark 1, right? Like literally starting weapons. The meme's dead in terms of what can level cap. Everything can level cap. It's been proven. So when we were bullshitting before, it was, well, if we're so good at the game, you should be able to get somebody else to level cap. Like, even if they don't know what they're doing, you should be able to take care of all of that if we're such good players. And to get a completely new player who hasn't had the chance to really learn the game and get that person to level cap. And that was the challenge, and we started having trouble at higher level, obviously. But the fact is we got the run done. That image I showed you was him killing the level cap Demolist, right? So the run's done. In terms of like build optimization, I have never wanted casting speed so much on a goddamn frame. I think Citrine, frankly, if people try to do this, themselves, I literally cannot recommend Citrine enough. Holy shit, she was fantastic. The fact is she offers so much support. Except for Chroma's base damage, I think Citrine might be the meta frame for this type of run, because she gives statuses. She, with an Archon setup, like an Archon mod setup, her 3 gives 5 statuses. The Panzer you're bringing gives viral. I even took the Path Assist, which is forced viral, and I modded it for gas, which would then provide 7 statuses, right? So there's forced viral on the Path Assist. There's a really high chance, a really high weighting of gas on this, and the pans are also procs viral also. So Citrine running around is, and I'm spamming the path assist. I'm popping as many spores as possible, so the spores are spreading as fast as possible. Which glaives are really good for, like AOE weapons, are good for popping spores. 1 second. And her 4. All right, let me show you the combo I was using, right? So you cast 3. You have to make sure the Demolist is in the right spot. Recast 1 or to the 2. And you have to, while you're doing this, I was using this pistol for like a heat inherit setup. And in order for it to work across players, the player with the higher status and faction damage has to go first. Because otherwise you'll nerf somebody else's damage. So I have to be to the spot first, right? And there's also host bias. So keep that in mind. Like say you're doing this with somebody else. Player 9 and I tested this just to confirm. I was host. If player 9 started the heat dot, was their first hit of the heat dot, and then I hit it, I destroyed his damage. Like he was going from like 13k to like 300, right? But if I hit it first, and I had no base damage on this build, right? So if I hit it first, my heat dot would be like 449 because I'm all faction damage and heat weighting without actual base damage. And then he hit mine, the heat inherit would take effect between 2 players, but I was host. So if you're going to do this, the person doing the heat inherit build needs to be the host, and that's really the only sort of like priority in terms of like 1, 2, 3, 4 you got to worry about. So if you do it, I rolled this weapon, or I formed this weapon, bought the Riven, so I could get an insane weighting on heat. I got a 60-60 heat, 165 heat, crit damage, because obviously I'm Citrine, I don't need crit chance, because I can aim. Faction damage to Grenier, right, because it was a Grenier level cap on Olympus. But this Riven also has heat damage, faction damage to Grenier, and so much slash. Look at the distribution of this. 145 heat, 6% impact, 10%, or yeah, 6%. 145 weight heat, 6 weighting of impact, and 10 weighting of puncture. And it's got magazine. Like this is, obviously I would have liked some more crit damage, but like magazine, if you're running support, this is a great little heat inherit setup. Because it's got so much heat weighting on it, and it's what, 118% faction damage to Grenier. But in order for this to matter, I had to shoot first, right? I had to get the heat done on first. So I had to be super quick when trying to get to the demos with him, right? Because otherwise I would end up nerfing his damage. So it's the way that it is. The person with the higher weightings, if they're not host, and you're trying to heat inherit onto somebody else, the person with the higher weightings has to shoot first. So they transfer. If the person with, like, say, no faction damage or is just running like a 60 heat mod shoots first, you'll destroy, and then the player with the higher elemental weighting and faction damage shoots after that, you'll destroy their dot. But if the player with the higher weightings shoots first, it'll boost the new dot, right? Like that's the thing about heat inherit, but it's I haven't seen anybody talk about it like between players, you know what I mean? But either way, that was the mechanic that we were trying to get damage on, and to be honest, it ended up not being really that useful. Because he had the Nataruk, and he had so much status chance on, even running I don't even know if he had 100 munitions, but the fact is he was getting over. When I got fully stacked, he was getting over 300% status chance, and he was regularly procking because he had Nourish on also. Or he didn't have it, but somebody else was boosting his damage with Nourish. He was triggering Puncture, Slash, and Viral on each hit. Well, if I had known it was going to proc like that, like, we would have just talked about boosting his slash damage, right? Like, getting more slash damage on. Um, so the heat at Heret just probably wasn't even needed, even though it definitely contributed. Like, there were a couple times I saw my heat dot hit like 30 mil. Because if I did the heat dot first, I can see it. So I could see how much he was contributing to the heat dot. But so I know it was doing something, but was it needed? Honestly, probably not. Okay. But the fact is that it's it was super fun. I cannot recommend older players, if you're in a clan and you got 3 other experienced players that are kind of in the category of our group that we were talking about, and you're trying to bridge the gap, or like you find like you're spending hours explaining mechanics and things on how stuff works to like the newer players. It is now known, at least in VOD form, and there are 3 point of views on this, because Sagen streamed it, Gray streamed it, Nova didn't. I've got a VOD up because I wanted the high resolution, high bitrate pass. There are now 3 sources of this. So you're going to have the Harrow, you're going to have the Nubro on the Stynex, you're going to have me on the Citrine, so you won't have the Chroma VOD or the stream. So if you want to use this as like how stuff worked, you can now incorporate an extremely low level player and get them along also to a level cap run, where before there's like gatekeeping, where it's like, oh, it's a sort of, it's not like a big deal, but generally it's the way the method has been, and even I've incorporated it, is you have 3 players that know what they're doing, right? Or like 2 players that know what they're doing, and they just do like 90% of the work, right? And the other 2 people just kind of survive, right? Like, so you'll have, like, if they want to be helpful, it's like, oh, take a wisp. Like, even I was guilty of that, where it's like, they're like, the new players like, oh, like, I'm really scared to go in, like, it's really intimidating, and it's like, oh, okay, well, if you want to be useful, take like a wisp or something like that. Well, now you don't have to do this. We got to something that works. Now you can get the new player up to the high levels, and they can be killing also. And you can do this at super low levels now. Now that we got a specific combo, I'd love to see some creativity thrown at this. So a high strength Chroma, probably it was very, very high strength Chroma, who was also using a Nidus Spectre to further increase his base damage increase and armor. I was running a very high strength Citrine. Like, I cast my 3 and it's already 90%, and I was way above that. Or 90% damage reduction, because I didn't have time to wait for a build-up. If I pressed it, I needed the damage reduction right then. The crit chance and the status chance from Citrine was wonderful. So I could see Citrine being like an extremely effective option as a support frame. If you were the higher level player and the other person's on like an Excalibur or some shit like that, you take Citrine and then like a Chroma or something that gets base damage onto somebody else, or something that can helmet on Vex armor. And you're good to go, right? Like, you can make this work. So it's just like Citrine with I wouldn't even know what because Citrine needs all of her abilities. maybe not her 1. I know that's sort of sacrilege. Like, you could Vex Armor over her 1, and that'd probably be the easiest loss if you had, like, another source of, like, orbs and whatnot. But I was spamming her 1, because it was my shield gate mechanic, and 2, so there was health sitting on the ground everywhere, right? Like, I had, like, 150% or, like, 120% health orb generation. There was shit everywhere on the ground. So if the guy ever took a hit, he would immediately suck up health and energy orbs. And like on the energy leech disruption rounds, or like when a Demolus was coming along and it had energy leech, well, there's a shit ton of energy on the ground, right? Like, it wouldn't be the end of the world. So the Citrine, I think, massively outperformed. And I don't even like Citrine, but just for the situation, for what she did, she massively outperformed. And the combo with the Scourge and Harrow, obviously that was god tier on somebody else. So it's just, I can't recommend this run enough. We haven't come up with official name, but they're calling it the Grarry run. I'm saying because it was the Gray carry run, because the guy's name was Gray. We were gonna have him be the carry, or like the Grarry Cap run, right? Because the guy's name was Gray. He was gonna be the carry, and it's a cap run. So the Grarry Cap, like Grarry, for Gray carry, and you combine it. I'm not 100% on that, but it sounds weird enough that it might be the name. So the Grarry Cap, or the Gray Cap, or whatever. It was super interesting, and it gives something for high level players to do where they can incorporate a brand new player. But just make sure it's actually a new player, right? Doing memes of like somebody who's on like a Smurf account, there's no fucking point. But if it's somebody who's genuinely new to the game, you can immediately remove the skill ceiling of level cap disruption all the way down to MR0, and you turn it into literally nothing. Right? Like, it's the skill required to get to level cap is literally as simple as they know how to shoot something in the head. Like, they just have to shoot something near it, and they don't even have to shoot them in the head because you're using the Scourge, right? With the bullet attractor. So they don't even have to aim. But the issue mostly that's going to be is we should have been way more attentive on keeping the guy up and like protecting him. If Chroma is going to be part of your setup, the Chroma, I think, needs to take the augment mod where Vex Armor stays with the allies when it gets cast, so you have like the aura, right? That was fine. But the armor being on, and because Citrine is aura based, right, for her 3, or sorry, the 2, the damage reduction doesn't stay very well. And because I was recasting it, like if somebody got too far away, they'd lose it. But making sure that the damage reduction stays on the allies, and the health regen, because Citrine has built-in regen, and for the armor and the damage to stay stuck on the ally, and whenever you need to recast it, you go near them, right? I think is a little bit more important than we probably gave credit to it. Somebody definitely needs protective dash. Like, just somebody needs to take it, and they need to know that when you're doing the higher level demo kills, where it's like 7k, 8k, 9k, like Citrine was good for it. But frankly, if you watch the VOD of the run, you can see some times where, like, because it was Olympus, right? So there, it had that room with the gun on it, the anti-artillery gun, or the AA gun, or whatever it is, the anti-space gun, or whatever the fuck it is. The ESO tile on the Olympus tile set. where I would go stand on top of that sort of hidden area up there behind where the boxes spawn, so I could stretch my hands because like and uncramp them because of protective dashing and casting so much. But energy wasn't an issue. Um, it did help that it was on steel path at times because there were a couple times where it's like, um, we would start getting a bunch of energy leeches, and then you would have an energy leech demolist, and you would come around a corner and into a tunnel, and everybody would get hit at the same time. Well, because it's regular path, it's a regular star chart instead of steel path, you can just spam pads out of it. It's not that big of a deal. So, super fun. Just to recap, the MR requirement for the new player, they at least need to get to Mars, so it's probably going to be like MR2, MR3. The Nataruk was a godsend. That made our job so much easier. Citrine is probably a really good fucking option. Okay, Citrine was a fantastic option. All of the work and the auras, the three other players being quote unquote carried by the new player, are gonna have to get damage, crit damage, or damage and crit chance at a minimum, and statuses to shred the enemies as much as possible. So they're gonna need viral damage on the weapon. So somebody should bring Nourish. Citrine feels like a meta pick for this. She was so strong. So you're gonna need somebody with Nourish. Chroma is an excellent option for base damage, right? Like, who in the hell else can put 1300% base damage on an ally, right? So Citrine and Chroma, I think, are really good frame combinations to keep the new person alive. Harrow was fantastic as well. And even then, I would say Harrow was incredible. But if you had to pick one that was potentially the flex slot, it only leaves Harrow. And even then, Harrow with the Scourge and the self-priming, the headshots were incredible. And Citrine can't always guarantee a headshot for her crit chance buff because you have to hit the crystal, right? So I think it's the interaction between the three of them. So maybe talking about like further optimizations, Citrine's 4. I was using Citrine's 4 for CC, but Citrine's 4 would probably be the helmet spot for, right? Because if somebody's running Harrow and you're running the Scourge Prime for the bullet attractor, the crit chance from Citrine isn't guaranteed at that point. Like, it's got to be like a crystal that's on the right spot. But if you're running Harrow with the Scourge Prime on somebody else, you're going to get his crit chance all the time. So that would make my helmet spot Citrine's 4 in this circumstance. So what would you take? If you're running against Grenier, Citrine would probably do the armor strip. Because we kind of lucked out because the guy had the Synax drop. So Citrine would probably, because I'm running so much power strength, Citrine, I would probably take Terrify. And that would just be how it's done. So I'm the Xenarch protective dash. I would be Terrify, which would be a little bit of CC. I would be the status chance, and the bullet attractor. And obviously I would take Lockdown. And the Harrow would be the crit chance. And every time a Demolist comes around, he just pops his 4. And Chroma is the base damage. So that would be like a really solid combo, right? And it would give iframes, a lot of iframes, to allow the new player to get their full combo out. So anyway, it's still in work in progress. There's no builds on it. Obviously, you can Revenant and Avara cheese your way to the top. I would honestly recommend, if you're an older player and you would be interested in something like this, taking a newer player. that, you know, maybe just got like to Steel Path or something like that, this can be an incredibly fun experience for you as well as the new player. Obviously, we did it with somebody who was very, very new, but this would make it so the new player was able to kill the Demolus at the level cap and would be able to participate in doing the level cap and not just surviving on like an invisibility frame or a wisp or something like that while they just sort of like try to survive. This would allow them to participate. This was an excellent experience. It provided a ton of utility. It's a lot of knowledge, and even though I know this isn't going to be something regular, I could easily see this being something that is just part of a rotation of stuff that I do to make this game enjoyable. Like, this was genuinely fucking fun. Okay? And I'm 36 and I've got thousands of hours in this fucking game. And I can't remember the last time I had this much fun doing something. Because I was getting to use my game knowledge, I was getting to use my skills, my coordination sucked. Because there were times where it was probably my fault that the guy died, because I was supposed to be protecting him. And the skill rotation is so long, I couldn't get it off fast enough. Like, even I was running a 25% casting speed shard. If I put 2 Tal casting speed shards and natural talent on the frame, I still don't think that would be enough casting speed in order to get my full combo off, because it takes seconds. It's too long. I would need to speed this up, and then I would also need to be able to Zenuric dash in the middle of the entire thing. So it's a work in progress, but this was a fucking blast. Okay, let's go over the builds real quick. It's going to be quick because I was the more experienced player. So this is going to be for the more experienced players. We'll go over the builds. Arcane Energized, rank 5. Molt Augmented, rank 5. You can see the status chance was 219. Molt Augmented gets you to 279, and the Chroma was running Empowered Aura, right? Where the fuck? Growing Power, sorry. Growing Power. So I was able to regularly hit over 300. Archon Flow, because I had the capacity, and 2 because of the 3. Like, it's the same energy max for sure. And if you have the capacity, and you trigger cold at all, you might as well just throw it on for the small bit of RNG. Archon Stretch, throwing the 1 around, and the 3. Continuity applies to the 3, so Prismatic Gem has all 4 base elements. This turns it into 5, so you'll have Heat, Cold, Electric, Toxin, and Corrosive. And because you're hitting stuff so many times, you will get 10 stacks of Corrosive. There's no meme associated with this. Rolling Guard, because it's a level cap, like, you're not going to be able to take Adaptation. Blind Rage, just for the power strength. Was definitely surviving off of the 1, dropping so many health orbs. Was doing the synth set on the Panzer, Equilibrium to compensate. Since Augur Stretch, I obviously can't equip regular Stretch. Augur Reach. And I did go Augur Message. If I had to choose again, I would get rid of this and make it natural talent. And just gimp the pistol build. And go double Augur on the pistol build. To get the Augur bonus. Because I had to be able to get over 75 at literally the last second. You'll see it, the VOD. Nova trolled us. It was all good fun. But he popped a shield blessing. Like 30 seconds before the mission started. And I was like, oh my god, my shields. And I had to throw this on. Okay, so but this is what the build was. Brief or Spite. I was the only person with Brief or Spite, so nobody else needed to fucking take it. Prime Sure-Footed, because of Eximus, knockdowns, etc. So pretty basic build. It's a generic Citrine build. When I was doing Olympus, the duration honestly could have been a little shorter The only reason to go further would be to drop to slow down how often you had to cast the prismatic gem. If you value uh, going over a minute, maybe, right? But it's not going to be an ideal situation because I went blind rage here, not transient fortitude. So augur message and continuity. Uh, Continuity is the generic duration mod that you throw on, right? Like prime continuity. So you're looking at like a corrupted mod, right? And you're going to lose range, and I didn't want to do that because let me tell you, the only thing that was like quote unquote perfect about this is I sort of guessed 175, but let me tell you, for the tile set, the rooms that were on there, 175 was the right fucking answer. At least 175. Like, you wouldn't go lower. So I could see potentially, I'm drawing a blank, doing an overextended. I could see potentially doing an overextended to get even more range on here. And maybe sliding it over like augur message or something like that and throwing more casting speed shards on her. So pretty basic setup. Everybody gets the theory behind it. The Scourge is just being a primer. It's basically here for the bullet attractor. Nothing fancy. It's got a shit ton of heat on it, vial acceleration. Amalgam serration is basically for sprint speed. Dexterity and the arcane, I didn't really need it, but the other ones were useless. I wasn't trying to kill. Hammer shot for more status chance on the AoE. Firestorm for the AoE. It's pretty basic setup if you're not trying to do damage with it. Path Assist is force viral. It is modded for gas. You can see the weightings here. It is a massive gas weighting. I am just trying to get multipliers onto stuff because we didn't know at the time, because he said he had a hate, and one of the few mods that he did have was condition overload, and we didn't know how the run was going to go. And he ended up using the Nadaruk. So the gas was literally just for a condition overload stack because he had condition overload in case he used the hate. That's all it was. There's no other reason behind it. So that's what this was. Other than that, I was just using it to pop spores. Pure and simple. That's it. And the actual thing that was allowing me to do like real damage. Sorry about that. Aclado has one of the highest Riven dispos. Normally the issue with this weapon is super low status chance, super low crit chance. The crit multiplier is but if you look at the build, I still modded for crit damage. The crit multiplier is 3.8. Base damage, multi-shot, ton of heat weighting, ton of faction damage, and an augur mod for the augur set, right? So the reason the build behind this is not meant to actually do damage, though it does. Citrine has the crystals. You press 4, you get the crystals. That gives us the crit chance. Crit multiplier is always in effect. Status chance is from crystal, the empowered gem. So this is 300%, maybe 280 if Chroma hasn't procced his aura. Though I have the aura too also, right, because it's an aura. So 300 pretty regularly. So this is 300% status chance. Crit chance is 300% crit chance, provided I can aim for a crystal. And a 3.8 crit multiplier, and a massive faction weighting to Grenier, and a massive heat weighting. So this weapon actually ain't that bad. Like, I was hitting like half mils with it. Not very fast because it's a semi-fire, but I was getting some damage in, right? Like, all things considered, I still did like 18% of the damage, and I'm running around with an Aclado, right? So, all things considered, it wasn't complete shit in the super niche bullshit setup. But this literally would only work with Citrain. Anyway, that's the build. Oh, and the Panzer. Standard Panzer build that we use. The only thing I would change. I'm gonna have to leave this. It's an Operator Arcane. I would take Accelerant over the heal to further increase. If I'm gonna go the Heat Inherit route, if I choose to do that again on the next one, I would absolutely positively take this, and I would keep Lockdown, and I would put the heal. I would take the heal off and put Accelerant on. Reduce enemy resistance to heat damage by 65%. This stacks up to 100%, like 100% weakness. Also interacts with Reactive Storm on Baruch. Not that that's relative to this. But you can throw this on. And this would give the new bro, if you're doing the heat setup, this would give you a significantly, it would give him like another 60% damage. Because if the new guy has 100 or has heat waiting on, right? He has heat. The heat is going to do more damage than corrosive. Because if the enemy has 100% weakness to heat, the heat's ignoring armor. Right? So I would do this to further boost his damage, and at higher levels it's going to be super fucking noticeable. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. Man, I can't recommend this enough. If you're like a sort of a bored older player and you got 3 other people that you hang out with and like a new bro that pops in and out, you might want to try this run. You might want to try it. If you've got nothing else to do for enjoyment, everything else that you're doing is for like repetition and shit like that. I can't recommend doing this enough for the older players. This was an absolute treat. Don't beat up the newer players though. But anyway, have a blessed day, guys. Take it easy. Thank you for watching this video if you watched it all the way. Take it easy, dudes.